we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to hand it over to Martina right now.
Good evening. How is everybody? Wow, how is everybody? Oh, all right. Okay, I thought you were at a socialist forum. I know y'all trying to move things up. My name is Martina Correia, and I'm from Savannah, Georgia, and I always like to call it Slovana because I always think that we go back in time when it comes to human rights and justice issues. But sometimes I travel around the country, and I think we're not as far back as I think. But I'm here to just briefly tell you a snippet about my brother Troy Anthony Davis, who's innocent on death row in Georgia. In 1989, I was in the military, and I had been back and forth doing different things and had been involved in the first Gulf War and everything. But my brother Troy had been downtown Savannah, Georgia, and actually trying to protect a homeless man from being attacked from a drug dealer. And when Troy intervened into that scuffle, drug dealer pulled a gun on my brother and said, you know, you don't know me, nigger, get out of here. And he was black, by the way. I will kill you, blah, 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 blah. Well, my brother was 19 at the time, getting ready to go into the U.S. Marine Corps himself, and he was actually waiting on a waiver to go into the Marine Corps, and a 16-year-old, and they took off running. When an off-duty police officer had come outside because the man that was being pistol whipped's girlfriend said, you know, somebody's attacking my boyfriend, blah, blah, blah. When the officer came out, my brother had already left the scene. And the drug dealer was still in the parking lot, and he was the person that had been pistol whipping the gentleman, Larry Young. And when the police officer came out, the person that was still in the parking lot turned and fired on the police officer. Well, then what took place was everyone's running, everyone's scattering, everything's going on. Well, no one knew what took place, what happened. Larry Young, the man that was being attacked, was even arrested. They thought he had been the one that shot the police officer. He was denied medical treatment and all this other stuff. But anyway, Sylvester Red Coles was the drug dealer that was in the parking lot, who was also a police informant. And he showed up the next day after he changed his clothes, threw away his gun, and sent somebody to see if a police officer had been killed. And the next day he showed up at the police department with a lawyer asking for immunity, and he said a boy named Troy did it. And at that point, all of the witnesses that were in the parking lot at 1 o'clock in the morning had been describing Sylvester Red Coles as the assailant. And in the black community, many of you probably would know, if you describe somebody as red, it doesn't mean because they're red. It's usually like really light complected, more of a yellowing skin, but you don't walk around calling guys yellow, so you call them red, you know. So Troy is more of my complexion, a little bit darker. They had 9 non-police eyewitnesses on the scene. And all of the witnesses had been identifying Sylvester Coles as the assailant. Well, what the police did the next day was they took the witnesses back to the scene, to the crime scene, with Sylvester Red Coles, all in the same vehicle, and said, okay, now we need to tell us what happened and describe the person that killed the police officer. Well, I'm not going to really describe the person that's sitting right next to me as the shooter when I'm afraid of him. So my brother was later convicted and put on death row for the killing of Officer Mark Allen McPhail. It took 2 years, and he was crucified in the newspaper. They said that Troy walked over to the police officer and shot him with a smirky smile, and someone described that from here to the front parking lot of this hotel, said that they were standing way across the street at the hotel upstairs, and they saw him at 2 o'clock in the morning in a pitch black smiling, shooting a police officer. But that was the captions in the newspaper. The next day, before they even talked to Troy, they said, search for cop killer, Troy Anthony Davis. They didn't even have what do you call it, the photo of Troy. So they took one of my out of my mother's house because my brother hadn't been arrested before and had never been in any trouble, but this other person had. And the reason that I'm getting into this is because over the years, 7 out of 9 of those witnesses all came forward and said that they lied because they were pressured by the police and coerced to testify against Troy. Because what happened was they had no knowledge of what happened, and they had to build a case around Troy based on what Sylvester Coles was saying, who was their informant, who's been arrested probably 30, 40 times and has never done any time in jail to this day. Sylvester Coles was the only person that even admitted that he had a .38 caliber weapon that he just happened to throw away after a police officer was killed with a .38 caliber weapon. And he said that he never saw Troy fire the gun at the police officer, but he saw an imprint of a nickel-plated .38 caliber weapon in my brother's shorts in his underwear. Now, I don't know about you, but you can't tell that a weapon is nickel-plated in somebody's underwear. So what's been happening with us so far is that the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act is what's really caught us up, and saying that you only have so much time to bring forth new evidence. Well, from 1991 to 1996, my brother on death row had no lawyer, because when Newt Gingrich defunded the resource centers, there was no money to defend death row inmates. So when his witnesses started coming forward in 1993, we really had to kind of like find the investigators to actually come and try to investigate the case. And then when you would get lawyers at the resource centers, they would stop and start, stop and stop, because they had no money. So in like a 6-year period, my brother had 9 lawyers that would start, they couldn't finish, they would stop, go back and forth. So when we really got lawyers on board to actually investigate this stuff, and we had everything come forward, then they said, well, it's too late, we don't have to listen to it. So that's what we've been dealing with. And last year, July 17th, my brother was scheduled to be executed. But because of human rights organizations from around the world and thousands of campaigning and signatures, we were able to get a 90-day stay at the parole board, because 5 of those 7 witnesses came before the parole board and told their accounts of police interrogation and threats and intimidation and force, which got them and led them to testifying against Troy. And it was enough for the parole board to give him an up to 90-day stay. And then the Georgia Supreme Court came in and said, okay, well, we'll listen to this case before the Georgia Supreme Court. We went before the Georgia Supreme Court last November. They heard the oral arguments, heard all the testimony, heard everything that was going on. And then they ruled against us this March 4-3, saying that recanted testimony is not as important as original trial testimony. So I just want to leave this with you. There's actually some petitions on the back table, and I'll actually pass them around. I would really like for you all to sign the petition, because if the U.S. Supreme Court does not select Troy's case by this fall, then we'll be facing another execution date no later than October. And they have no gun, no physical evidence, no reason for Troy to be on death row. And they even try to throw in 2 other charges against him that people have come forward and say that he had nothing to do. But I just want to read this to you briefly. This is a couple of the witnesses that said, the police were telling me that I was an accessory to murder and that I would go to jail for a long time, and I would be lucky if I ever got out, especially because a police officer got killed. I was only 16 years old, and I was so scared of going to jail. This young man was interrogated for 7 hours. After the officers talked to me, they gave me a statement and told me to sign it. I signed it, and I did not read it because I cannot read. I was totally unsure whether he was the person who shot the officer. I felt pressured to point at him. I have no idea what the person who shot the officer looks like. The police came and talked to me and put a lot of pressure on me. They wanted me to tell them that Troy confessed to me about killing that officer. The thing is, Troy never told me anything about it. I got tired of them harassing me. I told them that Troy did it, but it wasn't true. There was, and no doubt in my mind, that the person who shot the officer had the gun in and was shooting with his left hand. Davis is right-handed. So these are the type of things that we're dealing with. And if you want to know more about it, there's some information back there on the back table. You're welcome to take it. But I would love for you to all, I'll pass this around and sign this petition that innocence does matter, and can come learn more about his case at 7:30 when we're in this room. And also, if you'll take some of the petitions with you to your communities and get them back, and it's the address to tell you where to send them to Amnesty International, and my contact information, you could just send them to me. But if you go on Amnesty International's website, you can read all about Troy Davis's case, and a 35-page report that even gives you all the witness statements from what they testified to and how they recanted, and why we still have a person on death row that you actually have no physical evidence against and no witnesses. Only one witness that's left against Troy, and that's the person that 9 other witnesses, including his nephew, say that they saw shoot the police officer. Thank you.
I'm really humbled to be on this panel and to have been invited to be on it. I've been a supporter of the campaign to end the death penalty for a while now, and got into it completely in my personal capacity, nothing to do with with anything else, just because I believe that this is one of the premier justice struggles of our time in our country, And I have incredible admiration for all of the grassroots activists that make it the central political priority in their life to try to stop the state-sponsored killing machine. And so I throw my weight not just behind that movement, but behind the campaign to end the death penalty specifically. I also want to thank Martina for her incredible bravery and the way in which she has honored her brother by fighting for him on the outside as he fights on the inside. And Martina, we all share in your hope that your brother one day will be back on the outside with all of us. You know, if we look back at the last year and a half or so, this has been an incredibly dark time. But we've also had some grassroots victories that would not have been possible, would not have occurred had it not been for the incredible dedication of humble activists who just will not take no for an answer. Kenneth Foster lives today because of the resistance of death row prisoners and because of the activism on his allies on the outside who intend to bring an end to this system. And I take incredible personal inspiration from the struggle of the death row prisoners that have organized the Drive movement. Because these are people who are on death row that have pledged have taken a pledge of nonviolent resistance to their own killing. Kenneth Foster was one of the people that spearheaded that movement. And these are prisoners who say we will engage in total non-cooperation with the system that is attempting to murder us. We will not be complicit in our own deaths. And the story of Kenneth Foster and his struggle on those days and the hours leading up to when he was supposed to be executed were incredible. He, totally alone, surrounded by a SWAT team type apparatus, trying to remove him from his cell to take him to the death chamber, did an incredible act of defiance against that system. And when no allies were around him, when he was there facing down literally against the system, men with guns and tasers and others, he said, I will not cooperate. I will not participate in my own killing. And he did that all the way up to the last moment when he finally found out that he was not going to be executed that day. And to me, it's a great challenge to all of us, regardless of what part of the social justice movement we're in. If these men behind bars can resist when they have no allies around them, when they are totally alone, completely facing the state, and they have the courage and the bravery to stand up and say no to that system of killing, then those of us on the outside who complain about not being able to win, or we're not effective enough, or we don't have enough people, we just need to remember that there are people who are on death row that have no allies around them and stand up. And this is not just about the death penalty. This has to do with the tenacity and dedication of grassroots activism and standing up for what's right and against what's wrong. And all of us should take tremendous courage, but it's also a challenge to us. If they can resist in that type of a situation, those of us on the outside have no excuse for not resisting and putting all of our hearts into it. We are in a situation in the world now where we have an administration in power that has worked very aggressively to try to not only legalize torture and killing, but to legitimize it and mainstream it. We have several justices on the U.S. Supreme Court that have spoken not just in favor of allowing torture, but actively supportive of torture itself, and they mask it under the guise of fighting the so-called war on terrorism. But we also had another victory recently at the Supreme Court when, by a 5-4 decision, the justices ruled that the prisoners being held at Guantanamo have a right to the constitutional process in the United States and the right of habeas corpus. This did not happen in a vacuum. There was a major grassroots campaign of civil disobedience, and there was the incredible work of the brave lawyers from the Center for Constitutional Rights who, from the moment that this system of abduction and torture began under this so-called war on terror, were standing up to that system at great personal and political risk to their organizations. They have been called terrorist lawyers, lawyers for terror, and other slurs and slanderous terms, and yet they took this incredible risk themselves. Many of these people are not necessarily political lawyers who've taken on these cases. Some of them are corporate lawyers who've decided to volunteer with the Center for Constitutional Rights. Their entire careers were put on the line by agreeing to defend 1 or 2 or 5 prisoners who were being held at Guantanamo. There also was a campaign to end torture where activists went and on the anniversary of the initial ruling of the Supreme Court that legitimized the torture at Guantanamo, to stand in front of the Supreme Court and commit civil disobedience en masse. Those individuals then, when they appeared in court for their trial several weeks ago, and they were a wide coalition of people that included nurses and Catholic workers and other concerned people, they refused to give their own names in the court. Instead, they gave names of people who were being held at Guantanamo and refused to ever acknowledge any other name except for the name of that prisoner. And when they appeared in court, most of them decided to proceed in total silence because they felt that the facts spoke for themselves and that the outrage of Guantanamo needed to be met with a simple act of defiance, which was simply to bring the prisoners who had been systematically denied habeas corpus, to bring them into the courtroom that day. Some of them did make opening and closing statements in the voice of those prisoners that were being held. But it's not just the Bush administration with the tacit support of the Democratic Congress that is allowing this system to go forward. It also is the media culture. Programs like 24, where it's made to seem like ripping out fingernails is going to get you the results that you need. We have a culture that encourages and promotes violence against others and ultimately works to legitimize torture. This isn't a recent phenomenon. If you look at U.S. history and torture, we can talk about the experience of African people in this country who were lynched, castrated, tortured, injected with smallpox and syphilis, the Native Americans in this country. The United States government has consistently used the poor of the world, working people, and people of color as lab rats for a torture experiment. This was official policy in Latin America throughout the duration of the past 50 years. The CIA used human experimentation to create a Kubaric torture manual. And this manual was being used by juntas allied with the United States as well as U.S. interrogators. This didn't start with Abu Ghraib or Guantanamo. This has been going on for a very long time. It thrived in Pinochet's Chile, with the Contras in Nicaragua, with the death squads in El Salvador. And what we saw with what was described as the sexual humiliation of prisoners at Abu Ghraib when they were stripped down and piled in a pyramid, sometimes with dog leashes on them, those tactics could be found in a manual that was created decades earlier. This is not simple sexual humiliation. When you see a person naked in a fetal position in a cell, that's what they refer to in the Kubaric manual, the CIA torture manual, as regression. You are literally blanking that person, wiping them clean to a state of infancy. That certainly was done to Jose Padilla, who was, I believe, from Chicago originally, and he was systematically tortured to the point where he didn't know up from down, day from night, or his mother from a prison guard. And this has been CIA policy for a very long time. And what we saw is when the U.S. Went into Afghanistan, the torture regime that was implemented at Bagram Air Base and other torture centers was literally exported then to the Abu Ghraib prison. And it wasn't just the U.S. soldiers that were participating in the torture at Abu Ghraib, it also was private contractors. And that's the subject of a lawsuit by the Center for Constitutional Rights as well. Now, the reason that I talk about this at a forum where ultimately we hope the focus is on the torture in this country and the death penalty in this country in cases like that of Martina's brother is because this is the same fight. It's the same struggle. And I think that it has been shameful that other social justice movements in this country, the mainstream of the anti-war movement, does not take up in a more forceful way the issue of the death penalty in this country. We have a killing machine right here at home across the nation. And there are an incredible group of dedicated activists, but it's far too small of a group for the atrocity and the outrage that it is. And all of us have a very deep obligation to stand against this system of killing. The reason why I'm a supporter of the campaign to end the death penalty over other organizations is because this is one of the few social justice organizations in this country that is not just simply led by a bunch of white activists. There are former prisoners. There are family members who have everything to lose in this struggle because their loved ones are on death row or are doing life without the possibility of parole, LWOP. And the Campaign to End the Death Penalty is one of the only organizations that brings together activists who have the time and resources to do this with the families who have the most to live. There are board members of the Campaign to End the Death Penalty that come from various walks of life, and they've waged a grassroots struggle on an issue that, quite frankly, is not even in the mainstream of the social justice movement in this country. And I want to end by encouraging people to become a monthly sustainer of the Campaign to End the Death Penalty. I've tried to help raise funds for the Campaign to End the Death Penalty because I'm personally committed to that organization. But I also think it's important that all of us, if we don't have the time, maybe we're focused on the war, or maybe we're focused on racial justice issues outside of the prison system, or maybe our focus is on women's liberation issues. Regardless of what struggle we spend most of our times engaged in, and there are many of you in this room that are dedicated to one issue or another, and you try to put your focus there because you know your friends are doing something else. If there's one cause that truly needs our funding, it's the Campaign to End the Death Penalty, because they're doing the activism that a lot of people don't have time for. And can you just pass me the sheet here? So here's my pitch here. I volunteered to do this, by the way. No one put me up to it. So there's this incredible hip-hop CD called Cruel and Unusual Punishment. I'm sure some of you have it. If you become a monthly sustainer at any level for the Campaign to End the Death Penalty, you'll get a free copy of that CD. You also can buy them straight up, but it's better to buy them if you become a sustainer. Also, if you are a sustainer and you increase your level, you'll also get a CD today. You can do it anywhere from $5 on up to $50. You also can get a subscription to the New Abolitionist, which is a great publication of the Campaign to End the Death Penalty. Now, I understand we're waiting here a couple of minutes for the call to come in, and I had the honor of being with both Martina and Daryl Cannon, who apparently is stuck in traffic, and as Darrell will explain, he was one of the victims of the Chicago police torture system. And his story is harrowing, and we met him, Martina, originally just a short time after he came out of prison, and I have seldom seen a more brave soul. This man had decades of his life snatched away from him. He was as thin as could be, and he stood up there and proudly spoke in front of the folks at the Campaign to End the Death Penalty, and it was one of the most moving testimonials I have ever seen to a system of torture anywhere. And so I'm honored also to be on a panel with him as well. Mozambique, who we hope will be calling in, of course, one of the victims of torture under the Bush administration's system of torture. Daryl Cannon and Mozambique are victims of that same policy. One part of it manifests itself here at home. Another part of it manifests itself on the global stage. And the situation right now with the elections is that we have two candidates running for president that both support the death penalty. Barack Obama supports the death penalty. He wrote about it in his memoir. John McCain, of course, can't wait to start ripping fingernails out. He used to be different. John McCain used to speak out against torture. And John McCain himself was a victim of torture. Now, all of a sudden, John McCain has become the party guy again. The wheels fell off the so-called Straight Talk Express when it came to some of the most crucial issues that he actually was differentiating himself from others in his party on. And so I've been saying this on the issue of Blackwater, and I'm going to talk about that tonight. But on this issue of the death penalty right now, it should be a campaign issue. It should be a major campaign issue. It's about encouraging and supporting a system of state-sponsored killing in this country. And if the Obama campaign is allowed to just go on with a free ride from people who are concerned about that issue, then we will have failed those who are behind bars. And look, the reality is that after November, if Obama wins, he doesn't need much of anybody anymore. He won't need you to be in stadiums. He won't be looking for the same kinds of contributions or to argue on the streets for him. Now is actually the time when there is any shred of relevance to people saying something to the Obama campaign. On the Blackwater issue, I've gotten some indications recently that the campaign has gotten overwhelmed with calls from people who are concerned about Barack Obama's program on Iraq, as well as his program on the use of private contractors. And I'm going to talk more about that later on this evening. But on this issue as well, it's so important that whatever candidates are running and are seeking the support of people across this nation or across their districts, they need to be confronted with, are you in favor or are you against a system of state-sponsored killing? This is a crucial question. This is not a sidebar issue. And you know, in many ways, the number one achievement of the Nancy Pelosi-controlled Congress has been to get an approval rating lower than that of President Bush. And they had to work very, very hard. The Democrats had to work very hard to achieve that. It's one of the biggest achievements of their time there. in fact, some would argue maybe it was their only achievement in time there. They've done a very effective job of continuing to fund the war, of continuing to allow the Patriot Act to be implemented against people across this nation, to stand idly by, for the most part, with few exceptions, as the telecommunications industry in this country cooperated with U.S. intelligence to spy on people in this country. And so, I think many people in this room already recognize that we don't actually have two parties in this country. We have a war party. We have a party that defends the corporate establishment. But the reality is there's also a tremendous amount of political energy in this country, and that's not a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination. And so we have to rise above who the particular candidate is at any given time and make it an issue-oriented organizing campaign. And on this issue, one of the things you can do if you are not already a member of the campaign to end the death penalty is become a supporter of it, because the money, I can assure you, is going to go to the slimmest of operations in terms of budget and spending, and your $10 a month have gone a very long way. I want to just embarrass someone for a second. Patrick Lannon is here. He's going to kill me later for doing this. Just wave, Patrick. I insist. Patrick Lannon is a great ally of many progressive causes, and the Lannon Foundation is one of the organizations that really has stepped up to give support to the campaign to end the death penalty, and it's that money has gone for tremendous activism and activities. I'm not sure if anyone from Wallace is here, but they also, the Wallace Foundation also has really worked hard at trying to make this a premier issue. And I think we're a minute or two away, hopefully, from getting a call. I feel like I'm at an auction right now. While we're at it, I see we also have members of Iraq Veterans Against the War in the room. Camilo Mejia, Eli Wright. You know, I've been running around for about 3 weeks now on a tour across the country, and at almost every event I've been to, IVAW folks have been at that event, and this is, to me, the tip of the spear of the anti-war movement. The clearest, the strongest, and the most credible component of the anti-war movement in this country, and for these brave young people to be here as well in solidarity with those fighting against the death penalty, I think is a very profound presence, because these are guys who, for the most part, and women who were deployed in combat zones in Iraq and Afghanistan, and have not just taken up the issue of the Iraq War, but have taken up a wide range of social justice causes across the spectrum. And it sounds like we have Daryl Cannon. Is that right, Julian? Yeah. All right. So you no longer have to listen to me. I didn't mean to filibuster. I hope it was the best kind of filibustering possible. Remember, become a monthly sustainer to the campaign to end the death penalty. Get the Incredible, Cruel, and Unusual Punishment CD. And in any way you can, give these folks from the campaign to end the death penalty your support. And you can do that now by giving them a big round of applause for all the great activism they've engaged in.
Hey Daryl, this is Julian. So we have about 75 people here who are waiting to hear from you, so I'm going to put you on speaker, all right? Okay.
Hello. Go ahead, Darrell.
Okay, I extend my greetings to everyone that's there, and I'm so sorry that I wasn't able to be there in person, but I did my best. But the traffic, and they had an accident on the Dan Ryan that bottlenecked everything up for about a half an hour, so I knew I wasn't going to be able to make it, but yet and still I wanted everyone to at least, if you didn't see me, to at least hear my voice. My situation is not unlike a lot of other people who have been tortured here in the city of Chicago. I'm just fortunate that I've been able to speak about it and to live through it relatively unscathed, for the exception of me having animosity, hatred, and everything else for those that tortured me, because they did it not as a job, but they did it because it was something that they had been used to doing. They were all white, and they indeed was racist, because throughout the morning, from 6:45 in the morning until almost 3:30 in the afternoon, my name was not Daryl Cannon. My name was nigger. Nigger this, nigger that. My torture was a little bit more extensive than some of the other people who, my torture had been such that they put caliper on my testicles. They took me to a torture site. This was a hidden place where nobody was around, and they had me handcuffed behind my back, and they pulled my pants and my shorts down, and they repeatedly questioned me about a murder that I had no knowledge of. And because I wouldn't agree to help them find the persons who was responsible, they started to shock me with this electric caliper on my bare testicles. They even had a shotgun where they played a mock roulette on me with a shotgun, where they had me handcuffed behind my back, and they had this one detective named Dignit. He had a shotgun, and he showed me a shotgun shell, and he told me, he said, "Listen, nigga," and he turned his back to me, and all I heard was what I thought was a shotgun shell being placed up in the chamber. It makes that little sound, and then he pumped it, and he turned around facing me, and I didn't see no shotgun shell, so I just assumed it was in the shotgun itself. And then they started questioning me, and because I refused to answer their questions, one of the other detectives said, "Go ahead, blow that nigga's head off." And at that point, Dignit forced the barrel of the shotgun into my mouth. I wouldn't voluntarily open my mouth, so he forced it through there. He split my upper lip and chipped the tooth in putting the barrel in there, and then he pulled the trigger. Now, when you're in an isolated area and you got 3 white detectives got you handcuffed behind your back, another detective car is blocking off the entrance coming into this tunnel so that no other cars or anyone else can come through. All kind of things go through your mind. You know, you start thinking that, well, they may kill me after all. And after the 3rd time that they did this mock execution on me, when Dignit pulled the trigger on that shotgun, my mind told me that the back of my head was being blown off as soon as I heard that click of the trigger. And the hair on the back of my head stood straight up. And I just, it got to the point where I honestly thought I was going to die that particular day there, because these particular 3 detectives knew exactly what they was doing. This was nothing new to them, and they was having fun doing it. But it was brand new to me. And between the electric shocks, between them hitting me on my knee with a flashlight, my knee had swelled up, and all the mess that they put me through that particular day, they even tried to hang me up by the back of my arms, so that my arms, once they let me go, that the weight of my own body will cause my arms to go backwards almost up to my head. And the pain that caused was truly unbearable. But this is what I had to endure all day long, from about 6:45 in the morning to about a little after 3 in the afternoon. And by the time they finished with me, putting that caliper not only on my testicles and shocking me, but they stuck it in my mouth and shocked me. I was so disoriented by the time they finished that I was willing to say that my mother did it, because it was just that bad, and I had endured it as long as I could, and they took me beyond the breaking point. And as a result of that, I ended up signing a confession implicating myself in a crime that I had nothing to do with. And it took me over 20-some years of straight imprisonment and 2 new trials before finally the state's attorney's office knew that Daryl Cannon wasn't going away. that Daryl Cannon was going to continue to scream about what had happened to me, and I was going to continue to litigate this case in some court, somewhere, somehow. And through the state's attorney's office own investigation, they were very much comfortable in saying, hey, yes, he was tortured. We know these detectives did it, but we're not going to admit this in open court or anything like this. So what they did instead is that they quietly came into court and told the judge that they were dropping all charges against me. Murder charges, everything. They was dropping all charges. They was going to set me free. But now it was a catch to that, because the parole board stepped in and refused to release me. The parole board said, well, you signed the confession. Yes, we believe you was tortured, but we believe that you had some complicity in the crime. Even if you didn't commit it, you know who did commit it, and you didn't tell authorities. So therefore, we're not going to release you. We're going to continue to set you. So I had to take legal action against the parole board. Now, I'm already dead 20 years. Now I had to, the case is over with. So now I got to fight the parole board in court. And after 4 years of fighting the parole board, the federal judge told the parole board to look, either you do the right thing concerning Daryl Cannon or I will. And the parole board understood that if the judge ordered my release, then that would set a precedent, and other guys that have C numbers would be able to litigate their cases against the parole board as well. So the parole board didn't want that. So what the parole board did is that they quietly brought me back from Tam's Supermax one Saturday and took me up to Stateville. That Monday, they gave me a special hearing in which they reinstated my parole and gave me my freedom. So you see, not only did I get tortured by the Chicago, tortured by the parole board, members of the parole board, who are, by the way, ex-police officers and ex-state's attorneys. And, and their policy was, hey, look, whatever our friends did to Daryl Cannon, as far as we're concerned, he had it coming. But, that's not what America is supposed to be about. You're not supposed to say that torture is okay because, hey, look, this is a bad guy. And so this bad guy should get whatever he's got coming. I've never harmed an innocent person in my life, man, woman, child, or anything else. I was raised in a household with mother and father, sisters and brothers, and I never used drugs. My parents never heard me use a word of profanity, so I don't fit the mold. And even if I did, again, this is America. And in America, when you get locked up, it's supposed to be due process. I'm not supposed to be tortured into incriminating myself into anything. But here in Chicago, Virgil and company has done this since the 70s, in which they have tortured people and they've gotten away with it. A few judges have heard about it back then, but they just shook their heads about, no. Police officers don't do that. They don't stoop that low, when in fact they've been stooping lower than that. It's just finally beginning to come to the light. And as a result of that, we see now that Virgil and his hand-picked Klansmen are now on the hot seat because the federal government has indeed stepped in and said, well, we can't prosecute them for having tortured you, but what we can do is that we can investigate them from the standpoint that if they at any time lied under oath within the last 3 years, then we can prosecute them for that. So I'm thankful that they're now feeling the heat and that it's possible, finally, that maybe justice will be done. Maybe these bums will be in a court of law and they'll get exactly what's coming to them. Me personally, I I often hear people say, well, are you bitter? And I'm not to me, but I hear them say it to other torture victims and et cetera. And those other victims say, well, no, I'm not bitter. I don't have time to be bitter. I have to move on. Well, you know, Daryl Cannon is not one of those persons. If you ask me, am I bitter? Yes. If you ask me, do I hate him? Yes. If you ask me that I would like for him to burn in hell? Yes. You know, that is how I feel about them because of what they've done to me. I've lost my mother, my father. I've lost a son. I've lost nephews, all to the death angels, all while I was in prison. And not one time not one time was I allowed to come back to the funeral of any of them. Mother, father, grandmother, none of them. And so, as a result of that, I could never get back what I've already lost. I've lost all my family, everything else. I can't get none of that back. You know, even if the city of Chicago settled out of court and give me a lot of money, that still can't make up for not having your parents, your child, or your other family members here with you. You know, I lost my brother almost a year before I was finally free. He did his best to hold on, but it didn't happen. You know, so, yeah, I'm bitter. You better believe I'm bitter. You know, but I'm keeping it in perspective, you know, and which is, I got a job to do. And my job is to let it be known to everyone that can hear what happened, you know, so that they can understand that it does, in fact, exist here in Chicago. Racism within the police department is alive and well. It's not as prevalent now as it was a few years ago, and that's because a lot of light has been shedded on it, and people like those of you who are sitting in that room have now stood up and say, hey, I want to hear about this. I'm hearing of it, you know, but let me hear more. You know, what can I do to bring even more attention to this? And that's a blessing. That is truly a blessing that all of you are there. Julian, you know, he's the endless worker. You know, not only does he fight for the rights of those on death row to try and end that, but he's also taking up the challenge of, hey, look, police brutality. You know, that too is just as crucial as those on death row, just as crucial as us trying to abolish the death penalty. And I hope and pray that everyone that's there will, in fact, be as active as you possibly can. Because look at me. If I would have gave up at any time during the last 24 years, I wouldn't be home now. If I would have listened to what other people said about, hey, look, you can't win the case against the police. No one is going to believe that you was tortured. They told me that back in 1983 and 84 and 85 while I was in prison. Hey, nobody's going to believe you, you know, so you can quit screaming about that. Well, I didn't listen to what others said. I continued to scream and scream and scream year after year after year, and even now, it hurts just as much now as it did back in 83. But I have to always tell myself that this is necessity. I must continue. I must have the strength to continue this fight and to continue to speak out. Like I say, I'm so sorry that I couldn't be there in person so that not only would you be able to hear Daryl Cannon, but you would be able to see Daryl Cannon and engage for yourself whether or not Daryl Cannon should have been tortured. And I'm sure your answer would have been no. And even if you don't see me, I'm sure that you still are believers that, hey, look, this is the United States. We don't do things like that over here. We hear about that in China. We hear about that in Russia. We hear about that in other third world countries. But it should not happen here in what they call the land of the free, home of the brave. If that be the case, then what the living hell is going on with them doing this old torture mess, not only here in Chicago, but in other states as well? You know, we've heard about what happened in New York years ago with the plunger and all that. But, you know, here at home, I mean, it's just, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous and it's unspeakable. You know, but again, all of us have the power to say enough is enough. You know, we're going to stand up. We're going to do what is necessary to bring those to justice and to send a message to the rest of the police force that, hey, look, if you are a barbaric, then get that badge up. Take that gun and put it on the shelf, because you will not drive around in one of those cars that say serve and protect. You know, because that's not where your mind is at. Your mind is a devious one, so we don't want you talking about serving and protecting us. So please, whatever you do, please, everyone, stay involved, stay engaged, because Daryl Cannon is. I've lost too much not to. You know, so I thank you for the audience that you've given me, and I hope that I've given you something to think about, even when that hearing there is over with and you leave and you get in your cars. Please think that it does happen. It has happened, and it's still happening, but not as great as it was. And that's only because of the fact that the people are now speaking up. People are standing up. People are now hearing and believing that, hey, torture does exist here in the city of Chicago. It's been alive and well for too long. So with that, I thank you for your audience. As usual, I thank my main man, Julian, because every chance that he gets, he called Darrell and said, hey, look, I got this going on, that going on. I want you to come and speak, you know, and usually I'm there. But this time around, they had it at a time when I'm working my butt off, you know, to keep my mind occupied. And so by the time I got off from work and hit that damn ride, it was rush hour. So, and then the accident came about on the damn ride, which precluded me from being able to be there. If it hadn't been for that, I'd have been there saying these things in person. I'd have been there to answer any questions that anyone had for me. And if Julian say so, if someone has some questions for me now, please feel free to ask. Everything that's been said by each panel member comes from the heart and is true. I say to everyone that's listening to me now, please get involved. It's a necessity that we continue to fight for those on death row. It's a necessity that we continue to fight for all the other Daryl Cannons who have been tortured, who have not been blessed enough to be free like I am, or blessed enough to speak out as much as I have been able to do so. So just as I continue to live this nightmare day after day for the last 24 years, I ask all of you, please, let us not have to go another 24 years without having new legislation, without having new accountability for law enforcement officials as well as the politicians that make law, because we vote them in and we can vote them out. We want to end the death penalty. Let's do so. Let's let our officials know that, hey, look, if you agree with the death penalty, then you do not represent us, and we will not vote for you. We have to speak very loudly and very clearly on this issue, not some of us, but all of us, regardless to your color, your nationality, or anything else, because this affects us all. And again, I thank you for allowing me to be able to speak. I thank the panel for allowing me, especially Julian. Like I say, I cannot thank him enough because he's always been a champion right there with me, along with the others from the campaign to end the death penalty. So to all of you, my hat's off to you, and I applaud each and every one of you. And for all those that took the time to attend there, I likewise applaud you and hope and pray that you will continue. And thank you.
Well, I would just like to say just a couple of things. First, if you signed the petition, don't forget to leave them with me. But if you want other petitions, I have them, and other information we'll have at 7:30. But there's a lot of information about Troy's case on troyanthonydavis.org, and you can read everything, letters from the EU, from the Pope, everything. But I just want to say that also, I always tell people the best thing that you can do for someone in this experience is when you write to them, don't write to them like you don't know what to say to them, because a lot of people write to Troy and say, well, I don't know what to say because you're on death row. He's a person just like anybody else. And when you write to him, you just tell him about yourself and he'll take it from there. But my brother, he likes to write back every single person. It's been very hard because in the last 6-7 months, he's got more than 100,000 letters. And so I have been trying to help him answer some of those things in various languages. And I'm only saying that because of the power of people around this case. But I just wanted to say a couple of things. Is that, we were talking about the violence, but Professor Rick Halpern brought something to my attention that by the time that children in the United States are 18, they will have witnessed about 11,000 murders on television. That's not video games, that's not anything. So we look at the environment by which way we are creating a lot of situations, but when certain people perpetuate violence, if they look a certain way or they have a certain, class, then we want to punish. So we have to understand that too. But in Troy's case, in the paper last year, a white Klansman said that Troy Anthony Davis is the reason that we have the death penalty in this country. And I thought that was amazing since, the death penalty had been in place long before my brother was born. But one of the, we have a white Republican senator, we have one black female and one white male from Savannah. And Senator Eric Johnson said that the witnesses that recanted in my brother's case should be arrested and thrown in jail, and that Troy should be executed, and they printed that in the paper. And when the court said, when they said that this guy had been bragging about in detail killing a police officer, the Georgia Supreme Court said in their majority ruling that black men tend to take ownership of other crimes for bragging rights in the community, and that's probably why he did that. But Chief Justice Sears said that the court, they ruled against us 4-3, that they set the bar so high that nobody would ever reach it. And the court was morally rigid and wrong in their decision to at least not give Troy Anthony Davis an evidentiary hearing, because she said in her dissenting opinion, if they had given him an evidentiary hearing, they would have had to give him a new trial, which most likely they would have just dropped all charges because they had nothing. But one thing that I would like for you to do is that the Department of Defense, I'm thinking military because I was in the military, the Department of Corrections in Georgia refuses to allow access to the media to death row inmates in Georgia. Georgia is one of the only states that you never see death row inmates on TV or anything like that because they want you to stay away from that. And so we want to launch a campaign asking them, why do you allow National Geographic, of all people, are actually in the prison, videotaping the prisoners about how they like being in prison, but they won't let the media in to tell their stories. So if you could help me with that. October 4th in Atlanta, we're having a big, giant march for Troy. And we're trying to get thousands of people to Atlanta to that march that says that innocence matters. And so if you know people in the area or if you can come to Atlanta, we'd love to have you. And also challenge our lawmakers, because our prosecutor from Savannah said that he's run unopposed for over almost 30 years, but he's stepping down now because people are checking him out. But he said that this type of activism is like a curbside circus, and that it has no place in Georgia, and that the Troy's lawyers should take the decision from the Georgia Supreme Court and mail it back to the Pope, since the Pope wrote a letter in support of Troy. So when you see things like that happen in my community, I challenge you to write to letters to the editor, write to the people in Georgia, the legislators that are doing absolutely nothing, and ask them, what are they doing? What are they saying? Because people around the world are watching. And there's last thing is there's a young man that actually wants to do a documentary on Troy. And we're trying to work on that. But it's almost impossible to do a documentary when they won't even let you access. But then the thing about it is, like I told him, if I had $1 million friends, I would pay for the documentary, but I don't. But my thing is that next week I'm going to France to speak to the European Union and French Parliament because they've invited me to speak about Troy because they've been working so hard on this case. And it's amazing that I have to go so far away from my home to get people to understand that we are all human and that we all should be respected. And it's really sad when I go places and people say, you know, how can you live in the United States? And you know what I tell them? I'm not running because this is my home. I don't care how long I've been here or where my family was displaced from, but you're not running me from my home. And you're not going to kill my brother silently. And, you know, I just challenge all of you. I know you're working very hard and you spend a lot of time visiting people on death row and doing different things. But you know what? Sometimes take the time to, you know, pat one of those family members on the back because it's very hard for me. I'm the only family member out of 160-some people on death row in Georgia that speaks out because they're afraid. I'm the only one. And when I walk into the prison, it's like people are like, there she is, but they don't say anything. But the thing about it is, I watch these families and these mothers, white, black, other, and they're dying, and they have nobody to visit these death row inmates. And it's very, very hard for me because, you know, I've been battling cancer, so I can't speak for everybody. But as long as I have a voice and as long as I have legs to walk and do what I need to do, I'm going to do it because our future is at stake. And I thank you for everything that you're doing.
Well, I think we should end on that note. I want to say a very deep thanks, I think, on behalf of all of us to Daryl Cannon for calling in today and for his incredible bravery, his courage, his refusal to stop fighting. Darrell, we are all proud of you, and we're all with you. And also to Martina, who I think represents a silenced group of people, not a silent group of people, but a silenced group of people who are those family members who, for whatever reason, are not able to speak out. And thank you, Martina, for your bravery, your courage, and the example and your witness that you are to all of us and to all movements for justice and truth. So thank you. And thank you so much to the Campaign to End the Death Penalty. Become a sustainer if you're not already one. Thank you to all of those activists who refuse to quit no matter how dark it seems. Thank you all very much for coming.